All right, picture this. It's late. You're Alex, an aspiring CFO, burning the midnight oil. Your coffee's gone completely cold, notes are just scattered everywhere, and you're staring down the barrel of the ultimate test, Chapter 9 on strategy and environmental issues. Now, passing this exam isn't just about snagging a certificate, right? It's about proving you've got the actual strategic mindset to steer a massive corporation through some pretty turbulent waters. I know the pressure you're feeling, but hey, don't sweat it. We're going to dive into this explainer together and transform all this dense material into absolute clarity. Let's get to it.
So here is your definitive exam syllabus for the night. We've got 1. Defining strategy and direction. 2. The three-part strategy model. 3. Analyzing with the PESTEL framework. 4. Beware of strategic drift. 5. Porter's diamond of advantage. And wrapping up with 6. Scenario planning and TCFD. Consider this your roadmap to guaranteed success.
Okay, Section 1, defining strategy and direction. We got to start right at the foundation here, because before you can even think about executing a strategy, you have to know exactly what it means at that highest corporate level. According to leading thinkers Johnson, Scholes, and Whittington, strategy is, quite simply, the long-term direction of the organization. Think about Apple for a second. I mean, they didn't just wake up one random Tuesday and decide to make iPhones. Their long-term strategic direction fundamentally shifted them from just being a maker of desktop computers into this absolute global powerhouse of portable devices and digital music. If you need a perfect exam-ready example of long-term direction in action, that's the one to keep in your back pocket. But how does a strategy actually, form? Well, let's contrast two heavyweight theorists. On one side, we have Alfred Chandler arguing for rational planning. This is very top-down, step-by-step. You set your long-run goals first, and then you logically allocate your resources. Simple enough, right? But then, on the flip side, Henry Mintzberg argues for ad hoc evolution. He looks at strategy as something much more organic, like a pattern that just naturally emerges from a stream of everyday reactive decisions. Now, for your exam, here's the nuance you absolutely must remember. Real-world strategy? It's almost always a messy blend of both deliberate planning and incremental evolution.
Moving right along to Section 2, the three-part strategy model. Let's see how this all builds into an actionable framework. Seriously, bookmark this one because you'll need to completely memorize this model for the exam.
All right, this is the Johnson, Scholes, and Whittington three-part model: strategic analysis, strategic choice, and strategic implementation. But take a closer look at those overlapping circles. They aren't just isolated boxes sitting in a straight line. And that's actually the whole point. It brilliantly illustrates that strategy development is iterative. It's totally nonlinear. You might try to implement a strategic choice, realize it's completely tanking, and have to jump right back into the analysis phase. It's a continuous loop. To ground all this theory into some actual practice, let's tackle your first mock exam case study. We're looking at a classic SWOT analysis, which, by the way, falls firmly under strategic analysis. For an international airline, we map out internal strengths, like having a super modern fleet, right against internal weaknesses, maybe an outdated IT system. Then we shift our focus externally to opportunities, like a sudden spike in business travel, and balance those against threats, like sky-high fuel costs or the massive boom in video conferencing. A winning CFO uses a tool exactly like this to figure out how to leverage internal strengths to capitalize on those external opportunities. Which brings us to Section 3, analyzing with the PESTEL framework. Speaking of the external environment, analyzing these big macro factors is a guaranteed heavy-hitter topic for literally any CFO examination. Enter the PESTEL framework. This breaks things down into political, economic, sociocultural, technological, environmental, and legal forces. Now listen up, because here is some explicit exam advice. PESTEL is absolutely useless if you just treat it as a static tick-the-box checklist. You have to use it to identify dynamic drivers of change. You're constantly looking for the forces that are actively, right in this moment, altering the fundamental structure of your market. Let's actually apply this with some real-world data. Just notice the incredibly tight correlation over the last decade between capital expenditure, employment indices, and overall consumer confidence. As an aspiring CFO, you need to be able to identify exactly where your business sits within this economic cycle. I mean, are we riding an upswing, or are we bracing for a downward trend? You have to know, because those macro variables are going to dictate every single planned business decision you make. And while we're talking about external factors, let's look at the technological side, specifically the sheer mind-boggling scale of global disruption. Between 2005 and 2023, the global adoption of the internet just soared, reaching towards 70% of the world's population. Now, that's not just a fun bit of trivia for your next pub quiz. It is a fundamental technological driver that irrevocably transformed entire societies. And honestly, it caused absolute chaos for established businesses that were just too slow to adapt.
That leads us perfectly into Section 4. Beware of strategic drift. Let me tell you, this is the terrifying concept that literally keeps current CEOs wide awake at 3 a.m. And it's absolutely critical for you to master if you ever want to sit in that C-suite.
Just take a look at the growing divergence here. That blue line, that represents the rapid, accelerating pace of environmental change outside the company. But that red line is the organization's slow, dragging, incremental strategic change inside. See that widening gap in the middle? That right there is strategic drift. It's exactly what happens when your internal strategy just gradually, almost silently, loses touch with the actual forces at work in the real world. Now, there are 4 really dangerous phases to this. Phase 1 is totally fine. Incremental change works great in a stable environment. But phase 2, that's the drift. Then comes phase 3, which is flux. Performance drops off a cliff, and total boardroom panic sets in. Finally, you hit phase 4, which is just a brutal binary choice, either transformational change or death. Take Topshop, for example. They got completely stuck in incremental change, maintaining these huge, expensive physical store footprints, while nimble online fast fashion competitors like ASOS and Boohoo completely adapted to the digital environment. And the result? Topshop drifted right into administration. If you want to absolutely nail this concept on your exam, do yourself a favor and memorize this exact quote by Charles Handy. He called it, "A gradual change in strategy, a drift from vision that occurs so subtly that it is not noticed until it is too late." I mean, that just perfectly captures the insidious, creeping nature of strategic drift. It doesn't happen in an explosive overnight disaster. It happens simply because leaders stop paying attention. All right, Section 5, Porter's Diamond of Advantage. Let's flip the pages of our study guide over to international strategy for a minute so we can really understand the origins of national competitive advantage. So this is Porter's diamond. Michael Porter essentially set out to explain why certain industries and very specific nations end up dominating the global market. And he boiled it down to the interaction of 4 key attributes. You've got factor conditions, which is stuff like highly specialized labor or infrastructure. Then demand conditions, meaning you have a really demanding, picky domestic market. Third is related and supporting industries that cluster together. And finally, firm strategy, structure, and some really intense local rivalry pushing everyone to be better. Let's look at one of my favorite, most brilliant case studies for this, Belgian chocolate. Think about it for a second. Cocoa literally does not grow in Belgium. They have 0 natural resources for it. None. And yet they somehow engineered a massive global competitive advantage. How did they pull that off? Well, they had a highly favorable European location with great infrastructure, super demanding domestic consumers who expected the best, strong local institutes for collaboration, and constant cutthroat restructuring and rivalry. Basically, they engineered an advantage out of thin air where none naturally existed. Okay, we made it to Section 6, Scenario Planning and TCFD. We have officially reached the final hurdle of your study night, Alex. Take a breath. Now we need to look at frameworks for preparing for highly uncertain futures. Modern scenario planning really leans heavily on the TCFD. That's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures framework. It's a solid 6-step process. You ensure governance, assess the materiality of your risks, define your specific scenarios, evaluate those impacts, identify your responses, and finally document and disclose. ABN AMRO, which is a massive Dutch bank, followed this to the letter. They actually ran extreme climate scenarios looking all the way out to 2050 to see how increased flooding and drought would physically impact their huge Dutch residential mortgage portfolio. They were literally out there modeling the financial risk of rotting wooden foundation poles under houses. Now that is proactive, high-level strategic planning in a nutshell. So as we finally close the books on Chapter 9 tonight, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative exam question. If your organization's environment radically shifts tomorrow, will your strategy just drift silently into Phase 4 death, or are you prepared to transform? Master these concepts we talked about. Keep a constant hawk-eye watch on those external drivers, and I promise you, you won't just pass the CFO exam, you are going to lead your future company to lasting success. Good luck out there, Alex. You've totally got this.